Well, hello again, everybody, and today is the first of my talks about various things to do with Roman Britain. I'm going to talk about some places, Fishbourne and Chester, for instance, and I'm going to talk about some people, Cogidubnus, and maybe some other people, and some stuff like farming and roads as well. So there's going to be a series of quite a few now, all on the same sort of theme. So if you're interested in Roman Britain, we're going to be minding a rich seam, I hope. So, in the early 1960s, some workmen were digging a trench to put in some new drains to do with the development in a quiet and polite suburb of Chichester called Fishbourne. Little did they know when they started work that day, they were going to start uncovering the one part of the largest residential building north of the Alps. But that is indeed what they found. So, one of the workmen, on seeing some black and white regular shaped pieces, which turned out to be mosaic tesserae in his bucket, brought a halt to the whole proceedings. It turned out that he dug a trench through a mosaic, which you can see if you go to Fishbourne these days. You can see where that trench originally was, but at least it stopped the rest of the site being wrecked. So, what was Fishbourne like right at the beginning? In 43 AD, there was really not a lot there. It was part of the tribal area of a tribe called the Atrebates. The Romans had some links with those through a deposed leader called Verica, whom they supposedly was kind of an excuse to start the invasion, to reinstate him. But really there was not a lot else there. The first buildings at Fishbourne were almost certainly military, and it was one of the two sites where the Romans invaded Britain. It used to be thought that they all invaded through East Kent, a place called Richborough, which was at the seaside then and now isn't because it's all silted up. But it's been proved beyond doubt archaeologically that at least part of the invasion force landed in that area near Fishbourne, which at the time was at the seaside but now isn't because it's silted up a bit like Richborough. Anyway, if most of them went through Kent, some at least went through Chichester, the Chichester area. Pretty soon after that, it was established as one of a number of large villas which started to be built along the south coast area. There's some in Kent, some in Sussex, some in Hampshire, some into Dorset and Wiltshire. But it's unusual because it was much bigger than any of the others, and as archaeologists have shown, it's probably the largest residential property north of the Alps. How do we know what it was like at the beginning? Well, you dig down and you get down to the lowest period, and the reason we talk about going down through different other layers is because at various points it was rebuilt and new layers were put on top when they got fed up of an old mosaic or it started to decay. You put a layer of cement on the top, lay some new tesserae in that, and you've got a new floor covering. The whole lot burnt down at least once in the 3rd century, but was rebuilt again after that. So it was built in it survived in various building incarnations from the very earliest days, from the 1st century AD right up to the 4th century. Who lived there? Well, that's a big question, because the truth is we don't know for certain. The first archaeologist of Oxford University, Barry Cunliffe, in the 60s suggested that it was probably the home of a tribal king called Cogidubnus. He's called Cogidubnus by, we know that from an inscription, there was such a man. He was called Togidubnus on some coins, and he was called Cogidumnus with an M, not a B, by the historian Tacitus. So if it was the same man, assuming it was, we're not entirely sure how you spelt his name, but if it belonged to somebody at some point, it may well have belonged to him. It may have belonged to a governor called Sallustius Lucullus from the later 1st century, as suggested by some recent archaeology from Bournemouth University, but most people say we don't really know. Most likely it was Cogidubnus. What was it like in the 1st century AD? It was very large, it was very Roman, it was very symmetrical. None of these are typical of the Celtic tribes or Belgic tribes who lived in that area. It had columns across an entrance hall. It had a pediment above these columns, so it would have looked pretty much like a temple or an official building. It had baths. Which Celt ever had baths? It had symmetrical gardens. It had Roman-style plants growing there. It had an audience chamber for receiving guests or people who came to pay homage to the king or to the tribal chieftain. Whoever lived there, or perhaps the Romans who built it wanted the person who lived there to put forward this impression. It was about power and it was about status. It was very much saying to the local inhabitants, this is Roman, this is big, this is powerful, it's bigger and it's more powerful than you. It may also have been an enticement to say, if you throw your lot in with the Romans, then you could have a house as good as this. Now, Tacitus somewhat acidly comments on all this, that the Romans appointed client kings to do their dirty ruling for them, and in so doing, in seeming to give power back to a people they'd conquered, merely ensured their own slavery. More on that when I talk about Cogidubnus as an individual. But just coming back to Fishbourne and whether it was his, if it wasn't his, it's hard to see whose actually it was. The emperor's names were added to Cogidubnus's names. From the inscription, it says this was put up in honour of Neptune and Minerva, two Roman gods, and Tiberius Claudius Cogidubnus. Well, Tiberius and Claudius were definitely not the names given to Cogidubnus when he was born. Tiberius was previous emperor, Claudius was the emperor when the Romans invaded in 43 AD. Having Roman gods worshipped in a temple nearby, or possibly not far from Fishbourne itself, is another statement of Roman imperial power. There's stucco, which is moulded plasterwork. There's wall paintings, some of them remarkably similar to things from villas in the Bay of Naples. There's lots and lots of mosaics. First they were geometric, and what's called monochrome, which means one colour other than the white background. So these were black and white, they're all in shapes, a lot of symmetry there. In the 2nd century AD, perhaps late 1st century, there were some colourful pictorial designs, such as the Cupid riding on a dolphin, and there's pictures of things like a rather elegant Roman style vase. Some 3D effects in the design work too. So those mosaics are pretty impressive altogether. All of that is pretty stylish, maybe not quite so practical for living in Britain, which was a lot damper and a lot colder than for a Roman style villa being built in Italy. So, was it built for comfort or was it built for impression? Surely it's built for impression to make a big statement. So whoever lived there, whether it was Cogidubnus or Sallustius Lucullus or somebody else altogether, who knows, we can't prove it. But sure as hell, it's all about the Romans saying, this is us.